We're live. Dave Borton, Bull Java, from Mill City Roasters in Minneapolis, along with
Joe Marrocco, and I am from Cafe Imports, right here in Minneapolis as well.
But we're on the edge of St. Paul. Let us remember that, okay? What we're doing today is the coffee of the month for August. It's in Ethiopia, Yirgacheffe, from the Gedeo region, the Aricha mill. This is coffee Joe put on me about 6 weeks ago. We loved it. We scored it in 88. We're going to roast that on the Tor Fatori from Coffee Tech. FZ94, 2.4 electric, 2.4 kilo electric roaster. So we're going to have some fun. We've only been on this roaster for 3 days, and we're going to take a roll at it and give you our best profile with Joe's wisdom and input. Joe,
Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed, fingers and toes crossed. Joe, you want to introduce me? I'll introduce you.
This is Dave Borton, and Dave's here at Mill City Roasters. If you have any kind of question about a roaster or a coffee, and you have any kind of curiosity about a green coffee, Dave is the guy. I don't know how many times I've heard people say, man, I've talked to that Dave over at Mill City, and we just went on and on about a coffee. One of the things I love about Dave is the longer I've known him, the more I've noticed his curiosity. I think that might be your best quality.
Yep. Curious about everything, to include our roasters out there from Canada. 6% of our hits, 6% of our roasters are from Canada. And a shout out to Bob Fredrickson, roasting on a hot top on Prince Edward Island. Bob's a buddy of mine from my youth. We played ball together. Joe Marrocco. Joe from Cafe Imports, the senior sales associate over there and the director of education and training. Joe's a delight to know and knows soup to nuts on greens. So we're going to get the best of his thoughts this afternoon on Ethiopian coffees, the regions of Ethiopia, naturals, washed. We've got a ton of viewers that just smother Ethiopian naturals. And that's what we've got for Coffee of the Month. So, Joe, tell us about the Ethiopian regions, and I'll ask some questions along the way.
Sounds great. So Ethiopia is a very diverse country when it comes to coffee in particular. It's diverse in its geography, in the terrain, especially as you get outside of that Fertile Crescent, it gets very dry. So some of your regions that are a little lesser known, like Oromia, have coffees that are a little bit more akin to that dry nature. However, we really relish in the coffees from places like Yirgacheffe, which is actually a city that's located in a larger region called Sidamo. Sidama, the people of Sidama are called Sidamo. So a lot of times you'll see those things confused. A lot of times you'll also see spellings of places like Yirgacheffe different from one place to another. That's because the language is phonetic. So if you spell it wrong, you may be spelling it right at the same time.
Everything comes over from Amharic, and they don't use the Roman alphabet. So when we spell Yirgacheffe 3 different ways, that's the reason.
That's exactly right. You also hear regions like Harar. Harar is another region that's a bit more on the dry side, from what I understand. And that's why a lot of times the coffees from Harar are naturally processed. And they've been processing coffee in Ethiopia for hundreds of years now. And washed processing is really a relatively new version of processing. So when we're drinking an Ethiopia natural processed coffee, we're kind of drinking a piece of history. We're drinking something that has been processed in a similar fashion for hundreds of years. The beautiful thing about the coffees in Yirgacheffe is they're so delicate and nuanced in their flavor characteristic. Generally speaking, the best coffees out of Yirgacheffe have been wash processed coffees because they really show that delicate, floral, sometimes tea-like, bergamot-like, or bergamot, depending on your preference on that word, bergamot-like characteristics. However, this coffee is both from Yirgacheffe and it's a naturally processed coffee. This isn't processed in the older style of doing a natural where they would let the coffee raisin on the tree and then pick it. That practice is still done primarily for
Yemen?
coffees that are going to be, not really used for specialty, and then also in Yemen extensively, they still do that processing. But this is a selectively harvest process. So they'll pick ripe cherry and they'll dry those ripe cherries, and so you get that really delicate, nuanced flavor characteristic that a Yirgacheffe is known for. But on top of that, you have really rich fruit-like characteristics from the coffee cherries' essence being kind of absorbed into that coffee seed.
So what you're talking about is because there's not abundant water there, they naturally went to natural processing.
Exactly.
As
Yep.
opposed to Latin America where there's plenty of water, they used predominantly washed processing.
That's right.
Okay?
And in the Fertile Crescent, there is a lot of water. So Yirgacheffe has moved to doing a lot more wash processing within the past 50 to 100 years. However, now that natural coffees are becoming more and more loved, they're kind of doing both. So you can find naturals and you can find washed, and you can find very high-grade naturals. High-grade naturals are definitely a new phenomenon to coffee, new being not dating back hundreds of years.
And you'll also find particular roasters that don't go for naturals at all.
Exactly.
There's a
Yep.
great roaster in New England that doesn't favor naturals, to say the least.
Yes.
A phenomenal roaster. And so it's with some people an acquired taste. Other roasters just gravitate towards it and love it.
Yeah, so when it comes to processing coffee, especially with a natural process, a lot of roasters, or let's just say a lot of coffee professionals, will taste that natural characteristic, and they'll view that as being an homogenation of coffee flavor, or the natural characteristic. And they view that natural characteristic as domineering over the intrinsic flavor of the seed itself. And so by nature of it being homogenized with other naturally processed coffee, they look at that almost as if it is a flavored coffee.
Defect.
Defect. The defect being ferment. If you taste that fruit-like characteristic, some people will associate that directly with ferment. Personally, I associate the flavor of acetic acid or vinegar with the flavor of, or the defect flavor of ferment.
When it's gone too far in fermentation.
Exactly. And you can find that in washed coffee, you can find that in a pulp natural coffee or honeyed coffee, and you can find that in a naturally processed coffee. My pushback to that characterization of naturals is that washing your coffee, that also has a homogenization of flavor characteristics. Honeyed processed coffee. Any way that you process coffee, that processing will impact the flavor of the coffee by its own nature. So it's unavoidable that we're going to have some kind of flavor impact within a processing. However, washed is known to have a smaller impact in that. However, a lot of people are saying that bright acidity that we get from washed coffees is due to the processing, not necessarily an intrinsic flavor characteristic of the coffee.
Joe, yours is a large importer. How do you go about sourcing your Ethiopians?
Well, we work really closely with partners that are in Ethiopia, and we cup through a lot of coffees. We have long-lasting relationships in Ethiopia, and so we get to see a wide spectrum of qualities and offers, and we get to pick from those whichever coffees we feel fit our business model.
Very good. Do you have a most memorable cup of Yirgacheffe or Ethiopian?
I do. I think that my most memorable probably is similar to a lot of people's most memorable cup of Ethiopia that have been around for a while. And it dates back to, I want to say 2007 or 2008. And
Your memory is better than mine.
It was a natural Beloya. And that cup of Beloya, somebody explained it as tasting like blueberry muffins.
Okay.
And I tasted that coffee, and it tasted exactly like blueberry muffins without question, and just really blew my mind.
It must have been 1 year phenomenon of nature, water, weather, so on and so forth, because I remember just the buzz in 2007 was blueberry muffins, blueberry muffins, blueberry muffins, and it's gone.
Yeah,
It's gone.
it's a different thing now.
You'll get bits and traces of blueberry now and then, but more or less the phenomenon of 2007 is memorable for many. My first Yirgacheffe, I remember it tasted like Earl Grey tea. Pardon me, the bergamot that you talk about in there, and I had absolutely no use for it. And then the other one I remember most, not necessarily that I cared for, was a fruit bomb from Sadama. That's all it was labeled at. And I bought a bunch in central Wisconsin off a broker over there. And that was strawberry fields forever. And so those two I remember.
Yeah, the most often flavor that I get now in a natural processed Yirgacheffe is a strawberry-like characteristic.
Yeah.
Like a freeze-dried strawberry or a strawberry jam.
Yep, very good. So on with roasting.
Yes, sir.
We've got for you today Coffee Tex Tor Fatori FZ94. There it is. Ba-ba-ba. And so we're going to be roasting on electric today. Not propane, not natural gas. Capacity on this unit is from 110 grams to 2.4 kilos. And so that's what we'll be working on. There is in here 3 elements, and I'll be turning them down 1, 2, 3 as we go through the roast. Those are 1,000 watt nichrome heating elements. And so this is powered by 220 volt today. Some of the features on this unit are, again, the size capacity that you can roast, when and how we turn on the heating, the BTUs to the roast, will vary the air speed or the airflow, the draft, the exhaust, and the drum speed. And so there's variables that we've got to manage. We've been roasting on this 3 days. We roasted our heads off last week. At the end of this session, we're going to cup 2 of the best profiles that we came out with last week. We cupped all weekend, and we're going to take a run at them with Serena. So we'll go after the Yirgacheffe, Gedeo, Aricha mill coffee of the month that we'll be roasting today, and we'll cup those that we roasted on Friday. Ready, Joe?
I think so, yeah. Another notable thing about this drum is that the drum itself is perforated. So your elements are shining that heat directly onto the coffee, not only directly on the drum. So that's another interesting thing, and we'll come back to that while we're roasting. You'll notice some funny things during this roast. And roasting is still kind of an archaic art, and so some of the things that we'll be talking about are hypothetical, or they're things that we are guessing could be going on. So we're going to just have some fun and figure this thing out together.
We'll do it. That's 1.8 kilos. 75% of capacity, often claimed to be the sweet spot of any roaster. So we'll do 1.8 kilos of the Yirg today.
You want me to start when you give me the signal?
Yeah, what we're going to do is put this on artisan as well. It's a very different rate of rise. We'll track that and post that later on. And I'd love dialogue relative to convection, infrared, and rate of rise, which differs on the electric compared to the gas. Go ahead, Joe, charge it.
Charging.
And so I'm turning down the air. And I've got that on 25% capacity. Joe's going to give me some tips on how to use the air through this. All 3 burners are on. We're looking for a turning point of probably about 230, 240, someplace in there. And I'm going to use that in conjunction with my drying point, end of drying, to determine when I'm going to turn the burners down.
So
go ahead, Joe, please.
One of the things that you'll notice on this drum is that our rate of rise will respond very differently than on a traditional drum roaster. My theory on this is that we're using a temperature probe. We use a temperature probe on the other roaster. What the temperature probe is doing is it's taking an average temperature of the environment, the bean itself, any kind of extra heat that is coming off of the drum, and any other heat source. In this case, with the perforated drum and the infrared electric elements shining directly into the drum space, that's going to hold a higher value to the average that that temperature probe is expressing on our tools. So we're going to reach that average much more quickly. Your rate of rise is the coffee seed itself trying to meet the average temperatures that are being expressed upon it. So when you have a rate of rise that's very quickly moving, that is because the drum or the heating element or the air, whatever is bringing that energy to the coffee, has detached itself further away from your coffee. So your coffee is moving very quickly to meet it. And as your coffee moves to meet it, it slows down because the pull is less and less and less and less as they come together. However, in this case, with the drum being so far open, the coffee seeds itself are themselves have less pull on that average. I hope I'm making sense.
Well, what you're saying is they're trying to move towards equilibrium.
Yes.
Okay, that the bean temp is trying to meet the temperature of all the variables that are going on within that drum.
Correct.
And the perforation gives us something totally different. I'd love some feedback from Dr. Gary on this. Dr. Gary works on a north perforated drum, and it'll be interesting to see if he's got feedback relative to the rate of rise on his versus a solid drum.
Yep.
I'm going to turn around and grab turning point.
And then at the same time, your coffee is pulling back on the elements that are hot. And so if you have coffee seeds that are in there that are cool, they're going to cool down the chamber much more when your drum is perforated than they will if your drum is solid, because there's obviously going to be less metal.
So we've hit turning point at 315. The roast I did last week, I was telling Joe, when you do sequential roasts, that turning point drifted lower and lower and lower, and I got it down to 2 minutes. We've had a segue in terms of our discussion. So this is the first roast we're doing in a half hour, and the turning point is expanded to 315. How about air, Joe? When do you want air up?
We will start giving more air once we start seeing some change in the coffee. So right now we're still at a pretty green coffee. Once we start seeing some yellow though, we'll start adjusting the airflow. Or if I open this chamber and I see a lot of pressure pushing smoke, steam, little bits of chaff out, then that means we need to adjust that pressure, and adjusting that pressure means adjusting our airflow to allow that to go out of the vent a little bit more easily.
Negative airflow through here.
Exactly. So right now we're pretty green. I am starting to see the littlest hints of yellowing.
And last week I was getting drying time anywhere between 5:15, 5:30, 5:40, someplace in there. My guess is this is going to be a higher drying time, probably close to 6 minutes.
All right, I would say we're getting closer to yellow, so I would adjust the airflow up a bit, maybe another 25%.
Okay, so our airflow. Is now at 50%. Give it a hand.
Okay, let's give this an aroma check. Definitely moving out of the grassy stage. We're now just about to yellow. Starting to smell some sweetening.
Starting to smell like bread.
Yum. Like a fruitcake almost.
Christmas. Give me drying time when you're ready.
I think we're there. I would say full yellow.
Okay, that gives us the drying time at 6:05. How about the air, Joe, at this point?
I think we could start moving it up again, perhaps to perhaps another 15-20%. And then we'll make another adjustment to 100% as we're approaching first crack.
Airflow is at 65% now. I'm going to turn the burner down 2 minutes after dry time.
Want to give this an aroma check. Starting to
Very
get
nice.
touches of fruit coming out more so. Another thing that we noticed when roasting on this drum is that there was a little bit of scorching and a little bit of facing early in the roast. And personally, I believe that that is due to that infrared light shining directly on the coffee. We do have drum speed control, so if we start seeing a little facing, we may speed up the drum a little bit, because facing is when the coffee is facing the drum on its face and sticks to that drum for a little bit longer amount of time. So if we speed it up, it'll launch off of there a little bit more quickly.
Discuss what facing looks like, Joe.
So facing looks like the flat side of your coffee, which we are talking about perhaps doing a whole segment on roast defects. But the flat side of your coffee will be much darker than the rest of your coffee. And it can happen, well, the actual defect is once you've dropped it, that side is burned. But you can see that beginning early in the roast in what we would call scorching.
Okay, I just kicked off one of the 3 burners.
Sorry.
And Joe is anxious to try the coffee, so he dumped it in the cooling tray. I've got three burners in here, and I just turned one of them down. And I did that 2 minutes post drying time.
This is heating very nicely. I'm smelling not only for to see what stages of development we're going through, but also making sure that any wafts of smoke, any charring notes that may be there are not there. If I start smelling any kind of charring or wafts of smoke, then I know that scorching may be happening, even though in the little trier I may not see that exemplified.
Okay, I kicked off a second burner 30 seconds after I kicked off the first burner. I'm down to 1 burner, and I'm using the retained heat that's within the unit and 1 burner at this point.
And I think we're probably good to turn our airflow to 100%. Get that convection really moving through here at this point. We are starting to see a little bit of chaff peeling, and the color of the coffee is a little bit more brown. And we should be experiencing first crack any moment.
Is the seam opened up, Joe?
The seam has opened a bit. I'm hearing a little bit of crack.
Outliers.
There it is.
Okay, that was first crack at 9:55. Longer than all the profiles that we've done to this point. And I think that is because the roaster itself is not as warm as when I did sequential production roasting last week. Something just to take into consideration when I adjust the profiles on that first roast of the day.
And Dave, one thing I notice about this is when I'm pulling off this coffee with this dryer, it is just sucking air really hard. So that airflow is intense. So we may want to adjust that down maybe about 15%. That air is really pulling through there at a heavy clip.
Airflow's at 85% of capacity right now.
So one way you can measure airflow a little bit, at least a rough and ready measurement, is to get a lighter or a match. I like a lighter because it produces a lot less smoke. And you can put it right in front of your dryer port and see if it gets sucked in, how much it gets sucked in. If it stands up straight, then you've equalized the pressure drum. If it gets blown out, then there's higher pressure in the drum than the environment that you're in.
So you're looking for what to get blown out? Smoke, chaff?
The flame itself will bend outward if you have high pressure in the drum. If you have negative pressure, it will bend inward.
Often done with a simple cigarette lighter to see what happens in terms of lighting it.
So let's check it.
See if I want to give them a good clean shot.
Oh yeah, that's heavy suction into the drum. I'm gonna check this and see when we're getting close to drop.
It's 2 minutes, Joe.
I think we're there.
You ready?
I am ready.
Hang on, this thing really cools it down. I'm going to let Joe take over here so I can finally save this profile. Every time you and I've roasted, I've lost the profile. Guys, ask for it online.
So I apologize about the loud air sound. This particular roaster sucks the coffee so harshly that it literally will stick up against the wall of the back of this cooling tray. So I want to move it around a lot. There's some theory out there that if we pull the air over the coffee too quickly or too harshly, that it'll suck out some of that aromatic quality that we really want to preserve in a good roasted or well roasted coffee.
I don't know, Nick, how's the audio over there? You picking up too much fan? Well, because I can barely hear Joe when we talk with one another. That's how dramatically powerful that exhaust fan is in terms of cooling it. Get flat moves it out.
And that coffee is almost all the way cooled down.
Probably 90 degrees.
When I'm cooling coffee, I like to use the back of my hand to feel the coffee because that part of my hand is a lot less calloused than my really tough bare paw.
That means you work for a living?
Used to. And so I like to feel the back, or with the back of my hand, so I can see if it's at room temperature or if it still has any warmth at all. And I really like to cool coffee to where there's no warmth left in the coffee at all. It feels cool to the touch. And a general rule of thumb is about 4 minutes of cooling time. Anything beyond that may be taking too long and the coffee's still roasting. A little bit beyond what we want it to.
So get your coffee down to room temp, 2 to 4 minutes, or essentially you're continuing to roast the coffee.
So here's a trick. Pull the cooling tray out a little bit. Slow that cooling down just a touch. All right, we're there.
So that's the Tor Fatori FZ97 from Coffee Tech in Israel. Okay, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. What do you got, Nick? We're going to take a break.
FZ94.
What did I say? excuse me, FC94, that we've got available on the website. An Israeli-made roaster. There's a discussion thread going on in Home Barista now about an older Tor Fatori electric roaster. So take a look at that as well. Let's take a little bit of pause here, and we're going to cup 2 of the coffees I roasted last week. We are back. We've been joined by Serena von Helmst. She's going to help us cup these 2 coffees that I roasted last week. First one is profile where I dropped at first crack plus a minute 30. Second coffee is the same coffee where I dropped it at first crack plus 2 minutes. Before we do that, Joe, you wanted to talk about Quakers in
Correct.
natural. We aren't talking about William Fox and his followers, the Quakers, are we? In Pennsylvania?
I hope not. No, we're talking about the very lightly colored coffee seeds that you see post-roast. On a natural processed coffee, a lot of times the coffee itself, when you look at your roast at the end, will look kind of calico almost. There'll be variations in color from the nice chocolatey brown that you're looking for all the way up to a very tan color.
Spectrum.
Yeah,
Spectrum
a lot of
colors.
spectrums. Or a lot of color in that one spectrum. 50 shades of brown, so to speak. So if you take those really lightly colored coffee seeds and break them, they're super brittle as well. If you cup them, they taste really bad also. The reason for that is, even though the person that picked that coffee may have chosen a ripe cherry, the seed inside, for whatever reason, didn't fully mature. It didn't fully absorb in all of the compounds that it needs to be a really nice, dense, high-quality coffee seed. So when you roast it, there's no sugar browning because there's no sugar, or very little. There's no Maillard reaction because you don't have as many amino acids reacting with sugar molecules. So it stays tan. The reason that it's still found in that group of coffees is because when you're washing coffee with water, you use flotation. And those cherries that, even the ripest cherry that has an underdeveloped seed, will still float because it's super buoyant. Whereas density in the seeds will cause that cherry to sink, not all the way to the bottom, but to have the same buoyancy level as water. So it will flow through the middle of the channel. Where you have naturally processed coffees, they don't usually do flotation. A lot of people say, well, why can't we just tell them to do flotation? Well, they're generally doing naturals because they don't have that much water. So the practice itself is contrary to the sorting method that would be good for sorting this kind of an issue. And there's really no defect per se. Like if you look at the SCAA guidelines, this is not a green coffee defect because you can't sort that out as green coffee. You can't really see it. And if you look at our roast coffee defects, it's nothing that we've done in the roast to cause that to happen. So it's a natural occurring phenomenon, and feel free to sort them out. There have been talks about some of the lighter colored coffees that are in a natural Ethiopia, bringing some of the bread-like characteristics to the coffee, or even some of the blueberry characteristics of the coffee. So there's cupping experiments around this that you can do. Generally speaking, I just visually pick them out. I call that grooming the roast.
And I don't do that. If they gave me that bean, I'm going to use it. We should have a survey sometime, Nick, where we go ahead and see home roasters and small roasters. That's our customer base. Who picks them out and who leaves them alone? I'll leave a Quaker right in there. I'm not going to sort them out. And I don't know that it impacts the cup that much.
And I've cupped them. And they impact the cup.
So we'll have that continuing debate. This is the roast that I did that I dropped at first crack plus a minute 30. High florals, a lot of herbal in there. Mm-hmm. What do you get, Joe?
A lot of fruit. I mean, dried cranberry, dried cherry. It smells like...
To me, I get some peach in there.
Oh, definitely, yeah. Almost like a peach cobbler. Almost like a peach cobbler.
And there's also that nostalgic aroma of this being coffee, of course,
Yeah.
which is really nice. A little earthiness as well.
So that's the fragrance. The wet, smell we call aroma.
Thank you very much. Oh yeah, we're gonna slurp into our mics.
It's somewhat of a sparkling acidity for me. I get a lemon lime right out of the gate.
Definitely more of a lemon zest than a lime. It's not as tart as I would feel for a lime.
Sweetness to me is there's a candy, sweet tart. And that's the sweetness that I get in here. I get a white sugar married to a citric acid to give me a sweet tart in there.
Very, very lively cup. Delicate. There's still floral aromatics.
I feel like the aromatics has changed to the darker side, though. I'm getting a lot more of the chocolates in this than I did when it was the dry.
In the aroma, not the cup.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
And I get a lot of dried date and fig, caramelized notes as well.
It's awfully clean for a natural. If you ask me what my favorite coffee is, I'd never say a natural. I might say a Yemen. I'll take that back. But I am not a big fan of a natural, and this cup really appeals to me. My wife and I had it for breakfast, and she loved it, and she doesn't care for naturals. It's extremely clean.
I'm starting to get a lot of orange cream.
Definitely
Characteristic.
creams as it cools down a bit. That mouthfeel is very nice, almost like a buttery.
Almost buttery. I get a pineapple in there. I get some browned peaches in there. This is a great cup. Thank you for the find, Joe.
Oh yeah. I wish you all were drinking this with us.
Thank you. We got the second one started, and we'll tackle that one. That one was roasted 30 seconds longer with a similar profile in terms of when I diminished the heat and turned up the airflow. Not as much as Joe's, so we'll see when we cup this later on this week how that profile came out.
That'll
Sounds
be very
great.
fun.
Now I'm getting just a hint of that bergamot that you find in Ethiopian. It's not a real strong tea. I don't care for Yirgs that are tea predominant, but this one is just in the finish. I get the hint of the bergamot in there.
Yeah, I was gonna say the same. There's definitely a tea-like characteristic that's coming through the cup. And that's a really cool thing to find in a naturally processed coffee, that taste of place that is synonymous with where that coffee came from and other expressions of processing from that same place. It's cool that the natural process is not the only thing that we taste in the cup. It adds layers, it does not detract layers.
Super coffee, and I also don't like coffees that are dropped first crack plus 1 minute 30 seconds. I'm much more of a City Plus guy, and this cup is excellent. I'm close to amazed that I'm enjoying a natural that was dropped at 1:30, and that's not a sales pitch.
Yeah, and hypothetically, or my 2 cents on why that would be, is your natural coffees tend to be a little less dense, and so they'll roast to the same level of roast in a quicker amount of time because there's less product to be changed or converted. Also, you have those exposed sugars on the outside of the coffee that will tend to burn if you go later into the roast. So generally speaking, it's a good idea to approach first crack nice and slowly, and then to drop these kinds of coffees lighter than you would typically drop them for a wash process coffee or something that's very dense.
Yeah, and that's my confession. I go too deeply into a natural all the time. My BTUs are diminished and lower when I roast, but I have a tendency just to hang on too long. And a coffee like this just taught me a good lesson.
That's your natural tendency?
You caught that. You processed that.
Yes, yes.
All right, looks like our second pot's done here, so I'm gonna pour that out for us.
That's some of our dry processing humor for you.
Yeah, Nick told us in the back room to fill. And by the way, I told Joe at the break, we're getting emails that these types of events are helpful to you in understanding origins, in understanding roasting, and in understanding processing, in understanding greens. So your comments are helpful, they're encouraging, and we'd like to keep doing them once a month. Months coming, we're going to be talking about freight trade and organic. We're going to have cupping 101. We're going to have roasting defects, and we're going to be bringing in some of the others. This area is just rich in good quality small roasters. So we'll bring some of that talent in there to demonstrate where we're going with different topics. We welcome your topics and suggestions.
Please, bring them.
This is the same coffee, roasted to first crack plus 2 minutes. Clearly darker, the florals are diminished. I don't want to give up this first cup.
I'm getting a lot more dark chocolate in that.
Yeah,
than
and,
the first.
and it has the aroma of a pretzel to me as well.
Pretzel at the ballpark with mustard on it.
With strawberry jam on it.
Go Twins.
And just a note of going back to the original cup. Oh, sorry, this one.
Yep.
As this is cooling, the aroma is changing into like an amaretto. Really sweet, softer tones. With that vibrant citric acidity and malic acidity still there. Here the amaretto is coming out a little earlier while it's still really hot.
Still creamy, but it's got the slightest, not chalky, but there's an edge to that creaminess that wasn't on the first one.
Finishes a little tighter.
Fruits and florals are not quite as demonstrated as well. The flutes aren't either.
I feel like the white sugar in this one is a bit more prominent than the last as well. I feel like those fruits have kind of gone, and you get that amaretto and the caramel a little bit more with that white
Very good.
sugar.
Yeah, it's still white sugar sweet, but that sweet tart is not as balanced. The tart is kind of slid into the background, and we've got white sugar up front.
Yeah, I get a little winey characteristic too. Grape, for
Joel,
sure.
this particular roast, how would this pull on an espresso?
I would venture to guess deliciously.
And the first roast at 130, how would that pull?
I think it would be very bright, which I would extract it with a lot more water. I would have a lot finer grind and have a very long, extended extraction on that light roast.
As far as a long go?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. Traditionally speaking, they would call that probably.
And how long of a shot is a long go for you?
For you new wave espresso extractors out there, I don't know what you would call yourselves. I would probably start out with probably like 20 grams in and 44 grams
Whoa.
out, something like that.
Big shot.
35 seconds, something like that on the
shot.
first one. This one I would go a little bit more toward that 19 in, closer to 38 out, something like that.
I do 15 and a half on my Swiss Cremina with 23 out. I cut them short. I love them that way. And then I'm topping them, and it's a 1.1 ounce I get out of there with about 20 2 ounces of really tight milk for a nice cortado or a Gibraltar.
So this is changing a lot for me right now. It's getting really appley, like applesauce, apple cider.
Without moving towards vinegar.
Not at all. Yeah, really clean.
Yeah, that
It's got some
mouthfeel.
spice.
This coffee is going home this evening, and this will be pulled on my Swiss Cremina tomorrow. I'm still learning the crossover from pour-overs to espresso. That's a difficult transition. That's a difficult leap to make, to say, hey, will this coffee work on espresso? But I hope we've demonstrated today that this coffee was good. Very nice and Techniverm. Pour-overs. I think I did this coffee on a Yama vac pot at home. I know I did when we were up north fishing. And I took it home and pulled a really tight shot with it. So I hope today's presentation has helped on understanding Ethiopian origins, naturals, wet processing, Tor Fatori FC94, the electric roaster from Coffee Tech in Israel. I hope you can see this coffee of the month as something that's worth grabbing. And it's been a delight to be with Joe Marrocco.
Delight
and
to be here.
Serena.
Yeah, always wonderful to have you.
Thank you so much.
Keep those cards and letters coming. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks.
See you next month.